Hello and welcome to CodeZone Week 3 of the Platformer Lab. If you remember from last week, we have a couple of things already implemented. So we've got a pickup blueprint. We have several children of the pickup blueprint, the bomb, the coin, and the health pickups. And then we've got a UI element, a HUD, which shows your score and health, and then third-person character. And I'll open that up soon so we can see it. But first, I just want to go over quickly what we're going to do in this lesson. So number one, we just really need two additional things, because what the goal of this lesson is to have a complete game loop. So right now our player can run around, pick up things, they can get blown up by the bomb, but they can't actually die, they can't actually win. And so most games you have a win and a lose condition. And you kind of have several sometimes. So you might have several win conditions, you might have several lose conditions, several different. You might have a win condition for a level and a different win condition for the game, but this is just going to be kind of our level. So if you think of it in terms of a platformer, kind of common platformers, Mario, where there is an end to the level, and so an easy way to tell if the player has gotten to the end is to have a spot at the end of your map where if they touch that, then you just say that they won because they got past everything else. They got past all the obstacles. And then similarly, we're going to have a spot that the player can touch, which is the lose condition. And in this case, it's going to be a giant box that just is below the entire map. So first thing we're going to need is, so basically we want to be able to say, did the player win, did the player lose? And then when that happens, we're going to show them a pop-up box that asks if they want to play again or if they want to quit. And so we need two things. I'll just start writing now. Trigger box. This might be called box trigger in Unreal. And so we need actually two of these. We need a win and a lose. And so these are just going to be these boxes. The win condition is going to be really pretty small. So when the player runs into it, we'll know that they won. And then the lose, so this will be the win. The lose is going to be really large, so it's going to be like kind of massive. I'm not going to draw it to scale, but it's going to kind of go underneath your whole level. So if they fall off, they will inevitably hit this box because it's going to be so big that they have no choice. And so we'll be able to tell whether they won or lost based on which of these boxes they hit. Now the second thing we need to add for today is another UI element. So we've got the score and the health. They're kind of popping up in the top left. If you can imagine, this is our screen now. We've got, let's see, I think it's, got the score. And then a health bar. And for this, I think we used a progress bar. So in reality, we'd probably want a couple other ways to lose, like if the player actually died. So if the player hit too many bombs or too many enemies or something and they died, that would also be a lose. But right now, we're just going to stick with, did they fall off the map? Just 1 second. So, as I said, we're going to create a new element. We only want this to pop up when the player hits one of these boxes, so we don't want it to be visible like this all the time. So it's going to be kind of a pop-up box. It's going to have a couple of things. So it'll have some text at the top that says whether they won or lost, and then it'll have two buttons. The first button is just play again. These buttons will be the same regardless of whether they won or lost, but the message at the top will be different. And then a quit button. So because these are buttons, they don't actually, when you create an element, when you create a widget with buttons, it doesn't automatically have any kind of logic hooked up to it. So we will have to connect these buttons to some logic. So we'll create click events. I think they're called on click. And what this just does is it allows you to run some code in a blueprint when the player clicks one of these buttons. And these are going to be very simple because there are nodes that are already out there that are built into the system that allow you to restart the level, which is what we're going to do when they click play again. And then another node that just allows you to quit the game. So these are built-in nodes. So we're just going to have really short functions, just one node. The second thing we need for this part of it is we need to actually connect these trigger boxes to a function. So the third person character is something that's part of the template that we chose. So that's built in. We didn't actually create this, but we're going to add a function to it. So we have a blueprint, and I'll show you how to access it, that we did not create, but we're going to add a function to it called end game. And end game is going to be responsible for a couple things. Number one, it's going to show this window. So we have to actually create it and show it. So end game is going to be responsible for creating and showing this window. And then it also is going to do a couple other things after it does that, which are just kind of some housekeeping stuff, like we want to pause the player, so the player movement, so the player can't continue moving while the screen is up. Another thing, kind of logistical, is we need to show the mouse cursor, because when you normally play the game, the game kind of captures the mouse, so you can't actually see the cursor, and so without that you wouldn't be able to click on buttons and stuff. So we're gonna have to show the mouse cursor and then freeze the player. And so this function in third person character is actually going to be called from our level blueprint. And so down here, I'm just gonna, these are all the things we're going to be working on today. So level BP, and that's contains basically all the stuff that's specific to our level. And so one thing that's really specific to our level are these win and lose trigger boxes. So it'll have a reference to these, and then it'll have a couple of events, so collision events, to be able to tell, did the player collide with one of these trigger boxes? And if they did, it's going to call the end game function on the third person character. So the only thing is about this is this end game, the only interesting thing about the end game function, I guess, is that it's going to have a is winning Boolean as an input parameter. And the reason we need this is because that way we have one function and it will open this, because the only thing we need to change is this message. So basically, if we hit the win trigger box, we're going to call endgame with is winning equal to true. If we hit the lose trigger box, we're going to call endgame with is winning equal to false. And so it's going to run, it's going to create this window, and then the text is going to be based on whether is winning is true or false. So that's basically it for today. After we have this, we can pretty easily add another thing where, let's say we have, and I'm not going to add it in the lesson, but maybe figure it out for yourself, is in the pickup where we change the player health. So we have a function called, let me see what it's called real quick. Modify health. Let's see if I get, probably need some more space here. So we have a function called modify health in the pickup. And so you could see how we could pretty easily check if health is less than 0, then also call this endgame function. So we can see there are other ways we can have the player lose the game. So with that, let's just go through a quick kind of opening process. So the first thing we need to do is download the file. So click on this link from Slack if you don't have the files already for the Platformer Lab version 3. So it's right here in the Unreal Student section. Once you have those downloaded, let's see, I'm going to just unzip that. Alright, and then open it up. So this will start you with basically everything we had at the beginning or at the end of last week. So we'll be ready to go with Lab 3, or the version 3 of the Platform Lab. Okay, so just to kind of get us back familiar with this level, we've got character, we've got a bomb, a few coins, a health pickup, and we've got 2 platforms. So right now we kind of run around. You can actually see my mouse because I have a program that shows it, but in general you won't be able to see the mouse cursor. And so that's one of the things we're going to have to show when we have the pop-up window. Alright, so we got all that stuff working. We can't actually reach these platforms yet, but that's our game right now. So obviously there's no win or lose. So the first thing I'm going to do is create these win-lose boxes, because we can show these, we can just have these kind of set up so we can test them to begin with, and then we'll actually put them in the correct positions. So if we go to volumes, and actually not volumes, I'm just going to type trigger and grab a box trigger. So we have one box trigger. I'm going to Alt slide that out to the side, and so we have 2. And the first thing I'm going to do is just if you locate these in the world outliner, they're just called trigger box. I'm going to scale this up a bit, and I really don't like the way this scales, so I'm actually just going to type it in here. So for the scale for the trigger box, you can use this extent. And so I'm just going to do 200, 200, 200. And then drag it up out of the floor a little bit. And then same thing with this one. So I'm going to move it over, change the box extent to, oh, let's do 100, because that was probably too big. Now we can't actually see these in the level right now. If I hit play, they're invisible. So they're really just things for you to reference in your code. But so that we don't get confused, I'm going to start. The big one is going to be our lose condition. So I'm just going to change this to lose box, or lose trigger, and then win trigger. So we know if we hit the lose trigger, we lose. If we hit the win trigger, we win. So in the end, we're actually going to have our win trigger at a more reasonable location, like at the top of a platform or at the end of the level. And we're also going to have the lose trigger kind of below the entire level, and so that if they fall off, they're going to hit it. But for now, I just want to test, do these triggers work? And so what we can do to actually hook these up, because right now if we run into them, nothing happens at all. So we actually need some code to show, okay, did the player hit these boxes? And so I'm going to open the level blueprint and actually do that. So in order to get references to these boxes, the easiest way is if you have one of them selected, like the lose trigger, and then open the level blueprint while you have it selected. So now you can see some of this code we have from last time. I'm just gonna scroll down here, right click, and then I'm going to actually add an event for the lose trigger. So you can see it has a reference to the thing that I have selected, which is the lose trigger. And I want the add on actor begin overlap. This is the very first one. So now I've got an event that has code executed for any time the player hits this box. And so really, I only need to do, in the end, all I'm going to do is call that end game, right? I just want to end the game when they hit that box. But for now, I'm just going to test. So I want to print that they hit it. I'm just going to print lose. And then same thing for this win box. So for the win trigger, and I'll leave the code up a little bit longer for the second one. So for the win trigger, I'm going to go have it selected, go back to the level blueprint. Again, right click, add event for win trigger, collision, add on actor, begin overlap. And you can also just type it in here. So if you type overlap, or yeah, if you type overlap, it's the first one. So, and you can see in parentheses, it says which trigger we have. So lose trigger, win trigger. And then for this one, again, I'm just going to do print string win. And of course, this is not going to be the code that's we're going to leave in here, but this is just to actually test it out. Okay, so compile and save that. And now I'm just going to run the game. And since I can't actually see my triggers, I'm going to have to pay attention. But in the top left corner is where your print statements come out. And so let's see if we get any pop-ups. So if you see that, it's kind of over the score. It's a little bit hard to see, but it says lose. And over here, if I hit this one, I see win. So it is working, and I know it's kind of hard to see. I apologize for that. But I just wanted to make sure, okay, my boxes are there. They're hooked up. The player's overlapping with them. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is just, I'm still going to leave these in these positions because we're going to use this for testing, but I want to start creating our widget that's going to pop up when the player hits one of these. And so the widget is just a UI element that we can create to, or a collection of UI elements that we can create that kind of pops up and displays for the player. And if you remember back to our picture here, it's going to be a box with a message at the top and then two buttons. So to do that, I'm going to right click here, go to user interface, widget blueprint, and I'm just going to type, I'm going to call this end game BP. And of course, when I open this up, it's going to give me this user interface looking thing, which is different from your regular event graph. All right, so first thing we need is a box. And for this, I'm going to use a vertical box. And so that's going to hold all the rest of our stuff. So we want the elements to be laid out in a vertical fashion. So we want the text box at the top and then the buttons below it. So I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. You can try to center it if you want, but the easiest way is if you go up here to anchors, and while this, if you hover over the center one and hold down Control and Shift, it'll actually anchor it to the center and center your box. So that's what I'm going to do. So again, if you see this center alignment thing and then hold down Control and Shift and then click it, that will center you. Okay, so we need first a text box. So I'm going to type text, put that in the top. Sorry about that, I had a loud airplane coming by. And for this, it doesn't actually matter what it says because we're going to replace this text, but I am going to increase the size a little bit. So we can type size. Change the font size from 24 to, let's say, 36. It's probably good. and then let's see, align. I want to horizontally align this so that it's centered in my box. And then next I just need 2 buttons. And so I'm going to type button, 1 button, 2nd button. And now these are going to be, we're actually going to have some code connected to these, so we want to actually name these something that we can remember. And so for the first one, I'm going to rename it to play again button. And then for the second one, I'm going to rename it to quit button. So that way when we look at it in code, we'll know which one we're looking at. Alright, and then we need some text on the buttons. And so I'm going to drag a text block on there, text block on there. And then for this first one, I'm going to say play again. So this is under our play again button. And you can make sure, if you look at the hierarchy over here on the left, you can make sure that your play again text is underneath your play again button, because you wouldn't want it to be the other way around. Okay, and then with this other text block connected, or selected, I'm going to type quit. And then the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to select both text blocks and kind of make these a little bit easier to see. So the white text on the kind of light gray button is hard to read. So I'm going to search for color up here, change the color from white to something like a purplish, dark purple. And then same thing for the buttons. I'm going to select both of those with control click. And then let's see, I think it's background color. Yeah, so for the background color, I'm going to pick kind of an orange or yellowish. So if you remember some if you know some cool things about color is like anything, if you pick an opposite color, it's really good contrast. So like if you picked this color, then you could pick the one over here for the background and it would show up really well. And then I'm just going to make these a little bit bigger. So again, I'm selecting the text, and then I'll type size over here. Change these from 24 to 30. That should be big enough. Okay, so now we have, this is basically what it's going to look like. When it pops up, we're just going to have our text block. It's going to say you won, you lost, something like that. And then play again and quit. So we also need for this a couple of things. So we need both the play again and the quit buttons need click events. And so I mentioned that before over here, that on click we need actually an event that will do something. It's not something complicated, but it is something. So kind of, well, we don't have to scroll, we could just type event. So if we type event, you'll see there's onclicked, onpressed, all these other ones. We just want the onclick. So as soon as I hit plus, it takes me to the event graph. For now, I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to go back to the designer and then do the same thing for the quit button. Again, I'm going to search for event and then click the plus for onclicked. So now I have these two events. Then whatever code I put here is going to execute when you click on these events. So the quit one's really easy. Quit. That's it. And then the onclicked is also pretty easy. It's just open level. But in this case, we've got two options. So open level by name or open level by object reference. I'm going to choose object reference because it just allows you to select the level. And so under the level here, I want to select third person example map. Because if we go back to our level, actually, our level blueprint, you can see third person example map is the level that we're on. So that's it. So compile and save. These buttons are hooked up. They should work. Now, just show that code real quick again. So we got onclicked play again button. It's going to open the level, and that just restarts the level from wherever your player spawns. And then quit game, of course, quits the game. So this is actually, before now, we've actually had to press escape to quit our game, but right now we can just, we'll have actually an element to a button to click. So back in the designer, there's only one more thing I think we need to do, which is this text block here. It's going to be set from outside of our in-game blueprint. So we're actually going to set this from a function. And to do that, we need to bind this. So our text block here, we need to click this bind and then create binding. And what that does is create this binding to a text value. And so that allows us to set this in code. But in order for us to access this from outside of the class, we need to do something. We need to actually take this value and promote it to a variable. And I know that's kind of a strange thing, but that's basically how you do it. You just right click here and click promote to variable. And then we're actually going to name this to something useful, like let's see what I have it named at. Menu text. So our variable is called menu text. And then a really important thing to do after you name this is to click this little visible eye. So without that, we won't actually be able to see it outside of our in-game blueprint. Compile and save that, and I think we're done with the end-game blueprint for now, but I won't close it. Okay, so right now we hit play. Nothing happens. We still get the same lose over here, win over here if we hit those boxes. So if you remember, what we actually need to do is now connect these boxes. So we need to connect the boxes to the level BP event, and then we need to call this in-game function, which we have not written yet. So that's probably the next thing we'll do is on the third-person character, write this end-game function that will show this menu, because we know that the trigger boxes are working because they're printing some text. So in order to edit the third-person blueprint, it's actually not in our folder here. So, or it's not in our base folder. So if the easiest way to find it is just click on the third-person character, and then over here on the right in your hierarchy on your world outliner, you can see this link that says edit third person, and you can just see the beginning of it, but that's the one. I'm going to click that, and immediately we're going to see a bunch of stuff that we did not write, and that's okay. We'll just leave that alone because we're not going to mess with this. We're actually just going to create our own function. Create a new function over here, type end game. And then if you remember, we need a input parameter is winning, a boolean is winning, because we need our trigger boxes to tell whether the player won or lost. And so I'm going to go over here to inputs, new parameter, and type is winning. And that's good. So the last thing we need to do here is actually write a little bit of code. And if you remember what I said before, is that we need to create the widget and we need to show it. So if we look at this, I know this is kind of confused. There's a lot of stuff on here now, but our endgame function needs to create the widget, because we always have to do this whenever we use the UI widget. Create it and then show it. So the first thing I'm going to do here is create a widget. I'm typing create widget, and then we need to select which widget we want to create. And for this one, we're going to do end game BP, because that's the one we made just a minute ago. And then we also need to add an owning player here, if you see that. So I'm just going to drag off of that and type get player controller. That'll give us our owning player. Okay, and so you see we've got this is winning, and that's going to determine whether we whether it says you won or you lost. That's really all it does. So since we need to do two things here based on this condition, we need a branch. And so I'm going to drag off of here, create a branch, and then hook these up. So it's basically going to do true. If is winning is true, it's going to execute the code branching off of here. If is winning is false, it's going to execute code branching off of here. So I can make this a little bit neater. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so with that, we've got our widget here. We haven't done anything with it yet. We do want to show it regardless, so probably the best thing to do, well, we'll add it to the viewport in a minute, but right now we want to do two things. So if it's true, we want to set the text, the menu text. If you remember back in our endgame BP, we had this variable that we created called menu text. It's actually going to be bound to our text block here. So we need to set that, and to set that we can just drag off of this blueprint return value and type in set menu text. And if you did everything correctly, then this should pop up. And then here for our text we can just type U1. And then we're going to do another one of those. Set menu text. And for this one I'll just put sorry, try again. And then we need to hook these up to the execution pins of the branch. So we'll have it'll go one way if it's true, one way if it's false. And then regardless though, of which direction we went, we want to add this widget to the viewport now. And so I'm going to drag off this again and type add to viewport. And so both of these branches are going to converge here. So whether they won or lost, it's still going to pop up in the viewport. Then the last thing we need to do, well, there's two other things. I mentioned that we want to, I don't think I wrote it on here, but we want to actually stop the player movement and then show the cursor. So it's important that we show the mouse cursor because, like I said before, your character is just going to be, you won't have the mouse cursor generally when you start the game. So I'm going to actually get a new reference to the player controller here because that's how we reference the mouse cursor. Drag off of here and then set mouse cursor. Set show mouse cursor. And we want this to be true, so I'm going to check that checkbox. Okay, so we'll show the mouse cursor. And then the last thing is to disable movement. And this one's easy. You just drag off, type disable movement, and then it automatically gives us this character movement node that we need to make that work. So just to reiterate over these, we've got our endgame function with an isWinning input parameter. Depending on if this is true or false, we're going to branch to say you won or you lost, and then we're going to come back. Both branches are going to come back. We're going to add the widget to the viewport, show the mouse cursor, disable player movement, and that's it. So I'm going to compile, save that. If we play, notice still nothing happens because we still need to connect our level blueprint functions, our collision events on the trigger boxes to call that in-game function. So that's what we'll do now. So in our third person, just make sure this is saved. In our third person, our level blueprint. So I'm going to delete these strings or these print strings because we don't need these. We're actually going to call the in-game function now. So in a trigger box, we know this event occurs anytime anything overlaps that trigger box, not just the player. And so we need to make sure that the object that overlapped the player is, or that overlapped the box, is actually the player. So I'm going to drag off of other actor and cast to third person character. So this is going to, if this is true, it's going to actually, if the cast succeeded, then this is going to, we're going to do this. If it failed, we're just not going to do anything. We're just going to assume it was like it, maybe bumped into a bomb, fell off or something and hit the trigger box. So we've got the lose trigger. We're going to cast a third person character, and then we're going to call end game on the third person character. And so we can connect these, and the is winning, since this is the lose trigger, we want is winning to be false. So we're going to actually do this exact same thing here. I can just select these and Control W to paste them. Connect these again. So we're going to do the same thing for the win trigger. If we check to see is the player the one that overlapped it, if so, we're going to call end game. But in this case, we want to show is winning to be true. Compile and save. Now we should actually have some functionality. So I'm going to try to run over my lose box. There we go. And so if you noticed, I can't move around anymore. I'm trying to move around, I can't. And also my mouse cursor popped up, so you can actually see the cursor. And so we have this play again and quit. Now if I play again, it spawns me back where I started. Now I'm going to try the win trigger. Oh, there it is. Okay, so it says I won, and then play again and quit. And so this time I'm going to try the quit, and that takes me out of the game. So that is actually everything that we wanted to accomplish today. We wanted to hook up a lose trigger and a win trigger. Now this isn't very exciting because these are just invisible boxes right now that you can't see, and you just might accidentally run into them. So to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm going to delete this wall, and I'm actually going to move our lose trigger. Let me just search for it here. I'm going to make it really big, so I don't really care about the height of it, but I want it to be really wide. So, and again, I'm having trouble making these values move very fast, so I'm just going to change these down here on the box extent to 2000 by 2000. Okay, so now you can see that our box got really big. Right now it's actually overlapping the player when they start, but I'm just going to lower it down a little bit below here. So if they jump off, they're almost certainly going to hit it. Now I could make it even wider if you were afraid that the player might not hit it. So now to test this box, I mean, we actually already tested it, so we kind of know that it works, but just to test it in its new position, I'm going to jump off here. Oh, something went wrong. Raise that up just a little bit. Okay, so that time it worked. I'm not sure what happened the first time, but basically I jumped off. I got the lose game message. So we know that it's down there. And the win game, though, is kind of over here somewhere. Let's see if we can bump into it to quit. So really, you would want this on somewhere that looks like a win. Like in the original Mario games, there's a flag at the end of the levels, at the end of most of the levels, and then when you hit the flag, you kind of slide down it, and then you walk into a castle. So that's pretty obvious that they make it obvious that you finish the level because there's a flag at the end. So you could do something like that. You could add a flag to it, or you could add like a fireworks or something. I think we kind of did that in the original lesson, but really all there is to do now is kind of make your own level. And so if you have not made your own level, that's what I would recommend doing now, and then sharing it with the class when we're back together. So I'm just gonna quickly make a couple of platforms here. So hold down Alt and drag these, and then move my win condition, which is here. I'm just going to move it to the last platform, so the player has to get over here, which is going to be easy, but we'll just make sure that they make it. Yeah, so then I might change these end locations. So right now these are, I think, all, because I copied this one that slides back and forth. They're gonna kind of slide back and forth here, which is fine, but I kind of want them to do a zigzag. So let me maybe move these like this. Let's see what happens. Okay, so the speed on the first one's a little bit higher. But we could have them... Okay, so if we look at our... Let me move this box. If we look at our details that we actually added to it, we've got start location, end location, and time. This one's set to 1 second. I'll make that a little bit higher, so 3. And then this is set to 1. I think the rest of these are set to 1. So I'll make this one 3. And these move a little bit faster. So these will be 1.5. And then this one will be 1.5. So they'll move in a kind of phase, so that for every... So yeah, just like that. Alright, so let's see if I can jump on these. And again, you can make your level harder than this. Okay, so I actually hit the trigger box before I landed on the platform, but that's the idea. And if you think about most platformers, they have a series of places you can fall down from, as well as places that are just kind of, you can't fall off of it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm going to leave it at that. Quit. And if you have any questions, you can ask me in the next class.